everybody? Welcome to the Organic Guy podcast. I am your host, the Organic Guy. This is your home of organic conversations where you get to hear from various thought leaders across the organic movement. And every week I work very hard to give you a very, very special guest. And this week is no different because I am joined by Njathi Kabui, also known as Chef Kabui. He is an eclectic organic chef as well as a medical anthropologist with a passion for food justice, food literacy, and organic farming. He has designed his own disruptive cuisine called Afro Futuristic Conscious Cuisine, which we'll get to talk about in just a moment. He has given lectures in different universities, including Duke University, University of Cape Town, Rutgers University, and University of Michigan. In Kenya, he has set up a very, very special project called the Food Literacy and Sustainability Center in Naivasha, which aims to, promote agro-ecological organic farming, cookery, futuristic kitchens, food library, content creation, among other things. But all in all, it's fair to say that this guy is a very, very busy guy. That's why I wanted to take this opportunity and thank you for joining me in this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, such a pleasure. I usually like to give the viewers who are listening you for the first time to give them a little bit of context really on what has been happening, especially during your early years. So maybe you can help us paint a picture really during your, I'm talking about class 1, class 2. Has there always been an interest about food and food literacy? Or was this a subject that your parents were talking about, or maybe your schoolmates or your friends were talking about? So just help paint us a picture. How did you get yourself into food literacy and, becoming a chef in the long run?
In terms of things that I am very, very conscious about, I have two very, very clear examples that I can give that led me on the path that I'm on. One is my father. My father was very, very conscious of the food that we ate. When I was about 7 years old, I remember my father complaining to my oldest sister, who would buy chips and bread on Friday evenings because she wanted to go out and spend an evening with her friends. Maybe there was a party going on, a birthday party or something like that. So she didn't want to cook on Friday because I was staying with my sister. Very enticed to eat chips. They are the things you want to eat. Candy. Those are the things that young people want to eat. But my father was very, very opposed to that. He said, no, you cannot eat chips. Chips is not food. That's the first person I had ever heard complaining about chips not being food. Everybody else around me figured, hey, if you want to go out and eat, yeah, go get a chips, get a sausage. It's a balanced diet, and you have a few, especially if you have a few, a small serving of ketchup and some cabbage and a few, what they call coleslaw here. I don't know what they call it in the Netherlands. But man, that was a perfect meal. It was reasonable and that kind of stuff. But my father was very opposed to that. That's one thing. Then I noticed that my father did not eat sweets. If you as a child, you also you like your father, you respect your father, and you want to share. So if I would go to the store and somebody buy me sweets, and I say, hey, my dad, you want some sweets? My father didn't want to say. She always turned it down. So that's the first one. The second example is when I was about 6 years old, I spent about 8 months in Kisumu. So I was growing up in my native, in my ancestral home, which is Madioya, where I was living with my mother. And my mother was just subsistence farmer. So we had all kinds of stuff that we were growing, yams, cocoa yams, sweet potatoes, Then we had the vegetables and they were the animals. So we were getting our own milk. We were getting some of our own milk, our own meats and our own eggs and such. Then as a young boy, I traveled with my oldest brother to Kisumu, which was very, very unusual. Most of the young boys I was growing up with in the village, we just mainly stayed in our village. You're talking about the early 70s. And then I traveled to Kisumu. I don't speak the language there. I don't speak Swahili. I don't speak Luo. And I'm hanging around with the Luo. So actually, they didn't know me by my name. They used to call me Okuyu. But anyway, that's the first place I saw people eating these insects. When it rained, my friend, who was my best friend, my neighbor Akinyi, would ask me to go and help them run around these insects and catch them, and they'll cook them. So, I really becoming really fascinated by food. So those are the two events that I think as a young person that really got me thinking very, very differently about food.
The small insects are probably, was it termites or?
Yes, flying termites.
Yeah,
flying
plantains.
dumplings.
Yeah, very very sweet. I had an opportunity also to eat them. Yeah, and another interesting part of your work is your consistency and your involvement to organic, because you actually refer yourself as an organic chef specifically. So,
Mhm.
what is the story behind it? Why did you decide to concentrate on being referred as the organic chef?
Okay, good question. So just for FYI, I spent 20 years of my life in Kenya. So 10 years of those years were spent with my mother in the village. So village setting. Hopefully, some of our listeners can get the picture that I painted. You are not very exposed. We didn't have internet in those days. We didn't have computers. So the only news we got was from the radio, and it was only in the evening. We didn't have a television. So I'm growing up in a place where you're very, very connected, not only to the food, but to the community. So the seasons were very set. So during Christmas, all the family and relatives who are actually our neighbors, most of our neighbors are people who are very closely related to us by blood, would come together. So I'm very, very in touch with not only the taste buds of my time, but also my past. So some of the food that would be prepared during celebrations were food that my elders, my grandmothers had been preparing for a long time. So I have these historical connections to my culinary history. Then I moved to the city where I lived with my father and some of my siblings. And my father owned a restaurant in the city. So I'm still very connected to somebody who really cares about the food. So my father would ask one of the ladies who used to work with her to go and buy food at the market, at the farmer's market, come and prepare for us. And we'll come from the school and come to the city. I went to school in the Silly Boys when I was in high school. And I would come to town just to eat lunch. When I think about it, that's mind-boggling because I had a very, very short time to just take a matatu to town from Isli to town to eat. When I went to college, that I actually ate food that was mass prepared, like food prepared, industrial food, really. So obviously, it was a big culinary shock for me, my taste buds to be, and also my person and my psychology and my biology and my taste buds, and microbiome. They are all undergoing through a major transition or major shock because I'm coming from a country or an environment where I was eating very, very natural food, very, very fresh food all the time since I was born. But now, for the first time, I'm eating frozen food, highly processed food, canned food for the first semester. So I went through that shock, got me thinking and acting very, very differently. So my response to that was like, I have to figure out how I can eat. I can survive eating this food. Why? Because it was very easy for my body to recognize, whether consciously or not. My response to that was I really need to get out of campus soon so that I can have an environment, a place where I can cook my own food. I could not continue to eat the food that was being served in the cafeteria. So that's the first step. So without knowing, my desire to eat the food that I'm used to is what eventually led me to being a chef. So since 1991, you're talking about I moved to the US in 1989. So between 1989 and 1990, just 1 year was just a year in the wilderness, trying to figure out how do I understand the American food? Why is it that I'm feeling the way I'm feeling? So it took me a whole year, really, almost going 2 years to figure out how American food system worked, that the food was highly processed. The food was the one that was causing me to feel depressed, feel down. So since 1991 is when I decided to only eat organic food. So since 1991, I've not eaten food that's not organic. And that has determined how my life has been. Just a simple choice of I don't want to eat bad food has had huge implications in my life that determine where I can work, jobs that I cannot accept, places that I cannot live because there's no fresh organic food there, how much money I can spend. I don't have a budget for food, so whatever the market food prices go, that's what I spend. So anyway, that kind of thing. So that's how eventually I ended up finishing my degree in political science and philosophy. And naturally, because of my interest in trying to figure out how the food system worked, I found myself now in graduate school studying urban anthropology and medical anthropology, very, very related to food. I could not understand for the life of me why a country that was so popular in the world, was so powerful, had some of the worst foods I had ever experienced. Ever. And I'm thinking I'm moving from what is called, quote unquote, the African jungle, and I'm coming to the culinary jungle or gastronomic jungle where the food is so bad and people will just sell you just anything, perpetuating it as food and so on and so on. So I found myself now really being very interested in this topic of food. So, and culture and power, because now as more I read and learned about it, the more I realized that there are so many layers to what I just simply thought was just food. And the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know, and the more I wanted to learn. So after that, I did a 4-year independent study and ended up going to culinary school to study culinary arts. And why did I do that? Is because through all my learning, I realized that food is the most political thing that you ever touch in your life. So now once you learn that, what do? Then now you're equipped with the knowledge. Then you realize that as a person of African descent, once you realize that food is being used political, and this is not something that's so obvious to people, my natural work for me to do was to become an activist to inform other people about what I had found out and what I thought were some of the possible solutions, because it's not a matter of a choice. We didn't have a choice. The way we were consuming our food was directly connected to the kind of freedoms that we are going to have, to the kind of culture we're going to have, to the kind of world that we're going to have. Because if we consume unhealthy food, we are damaging the environment, we are damaging ourselves, we are damaging our community, we are damaging our country, and we are damaging our culture. We are perpetuating a culture that's unsustainable to our children. So that's why I ended up being an organic chef.
I must say that's a very, very interesting, experiences that you've had throughout your life. I could especially relate when you're talking about your first time moving from, home and then moving to high school, testing that different food. You just gave me those memories as well. I also remember the first time I've lived with my grandmother for a long time, and, the craft that goes into cooking that food, the time that is taken, the way she was very careful about cooking the food. When I went to high school, it was a completely different story. You could often find some insect in your githeri. You used to consume githeris a lot. It's a very different experience. It's important to say that it really had a very huge impact on how you viewed food from simply having that experience as well. Another point that I got curious about when you were mentioning about food is the most political and most intimate thing that people can come across. What does that statement actually mean to you? So can you help us explain more what that statement means?
Okay. Yeah, what that statement means is that food is foundation of everything else. If you want to build a house, you can decide you want to build a house out of hemp. You want to build a house out of mud. You don't have to use cement. You don't have to use tiles. You don't have to use paint. You can build a house without cement and all that stuff, and you can live. People have lived that for ages. So if the person you're competing with realizes, hey, you have a weakness for money, so they are going to entice you with money. In fact, we have a saying in my language that says, you trap something using what it likes. Okay. So think about it. So if people know that, hey, I want to have a lot of power in this world, the one thing that will give you the most power is the thing that everybody consumes. So if you consume that thing, if you can control that thing, then you'll have more power than anybody else. I always say this: if everything in the world has a God, the God of food will be the strongest God. So it doesn't matter. You're the God of gold. Good. You're good. I more respect to you. You're the God of oil. More respect to you. But guess what? Once you get all the oil, or once you get all the gold, you still have to go to the God of food in the evening and kneel down and bow down to that God, because you have to eat. And there are all these examples that we can use in history, like the story of King Midas, the one who wanted to touch anything that he touched to turn in gold. Then how is they going to eat? Every time they touch an apple, it becomes gold. Every time you touch a banana, it becomes gold. You can't live like that. It's a very, very good example. So it's for that reason that I realized that the one game that the world is being played on without realizing is that there are some people who have become so wickedly wise that they know if they can control food, then they can amass. And when I understood that, it totally shifted my thinking about how I approach everything. So I realized that when you have a global power where power is amassed by just one group has such an enormous amount of power, you have to treat everything politically. You have to calculate every step of that you make. And finally, the last example: if you have very limited source, you can relate. We both been students. You are a student now. If you're not earning a lot of money, but yet you have a lot of expenses, then every single cent counts. You can't say, "Oh, I don't care about that $100. I don't care about that 10,000 shillings." No, when you're in distress, every single cent counts, and that's where we are. We are in a place, especially of people of African descent, whereby the world powers are not favorable to our existence and to our freedoms or to our political and economic gain. We are finding that the way the global system is set, Africa is set in a way, Africa's position is such that it puts it in a position of disadvantage. You can talk about slavery and colonialism as two blatant examples that have significantly disadvantaged Africa. So that's a history we are coming out of, and then we become complacent to the fact that the same principles that are applied during colonialism and slavery could potentially be carried on using other means, like economic policies that puts us at a position where we borrow money from the same people who exploited our resources. Now we are indebted to them. They didn't pay for all the exploitation they put us through, but now we're having to borrow money from them. That puts it as a position of disadvantage. For that reason, it occurred to me as a very, very sensible stance to take, that I'll take everything is a political act. So the way I eat is political. How I dress is political. Why? Because as long as it gives one group power and it puts me at a disadvantage, then it has to be a political. And even if those people don't design it as such, or they don't admit it as such, it is political because it has consequences that are going to put me at a political disadvantage, period.
It's very interesting how you put it, in terms of viewing food from a power point of view. So, whoever has control of food probably has control of you and how you're going to act in the future, and what kind of action you're likely going to take. And, we've seen this kind of move, especially now, genetically modified food being propelled now into the African continent without really knowing that this genetically modified food are actually patents owned by different multinationals, which are tied to this government, which can use those kind of patents against nations nowadays. So we have, when you take your position of looking food from a political point of view, everything sort of makes sense. And you can, when you use that lens, then you see how things play geopolitically and how different powers can use this intimate thing we call food to their political advantage. So I like that view, and I think it's a different way and a good way we can be able to use it to look at how we interact with food moving forward. You have now developed your own cuisine, which you have labeled it the Afro Futuristic Conscious Cuisine. And I've read some of your work where you really use a particular event that happened in your life or a particular person to name your cuisine. So can you take us through what was the process of naming this cuisine and what does it represent?
Good question. So Afro-Futuristic Conscious Cuisine was not, in all honesty, something that I first sat down under a tree and an apple fell on my head and I say, Eureka, I found out. It was a consequence. It was a reaction to my own experience. It was a great opportunity for me to have traveled to the U.S. When I traveled to the U.S. in 1989, not many people. We were actually in the town where I was living. There was only 4 Kenyans the whole town. Now there are several, probably 1,000 Kenyans now. So you can imagine, what a rare opportunity it was for me. I was the first one in my family to go to university. I was the first one in my college to study, what I was studying. Actually, even in my region, I don't know too many other medical anthropologists, who are also urban anthropologists, and so on, so on, so on. So it was a very rare opportunity that I had. So I was also very conscious of that. What happened is, the more I listened to people talking about food, I noticed that people, especially people of African descent, talked about food in the past, never in the future. It's only my grandmother used to cook this, which is fine. That's what your grandmother prepared that because that's what she had access to. So in a way, it occurred to me that we ourselves were colonizing our own food. We were limiting our own food. We were talking about food, our own food, in very definite and concise terms, as though it's not something that could be expanded. It was like a definite concept that African food is this. It can never be anything more. That is what it is. Kenyan food is this. You can't talk about anything else as Kenyan food. So I started having a pushback around that. So what happened is that having lived in the US, I would take any new concept and Africanize it. So if I ran into mushrooms, we were not eating mushrooms when I was growing up. We didn't have any mushrooms. So hey, this is really good. I can add it to some of our traditional beans. I can add it to millet. I can add so on, so on, so on. I can add rutabagas. Rutabagas was things that we used to see being sold on Rumuru Highway or not when traveling to Naivasha. And we used to say, oh, this is European food. In fact, the other greens like fenugreek, we used to call food this Indian food. Now, hold on. This food is being grown in Kenya by Kenyans. And then I asked myself, what is Kenyan food? Is it the food that's being prepared in Kenya at a 5-star restaurant? Is it the food that's being prepared in Kenya, in the Kenyan slums, in the city slums? Is it the food in Kenya that's being consumed in a high-end restaurant at the coast? Because that's not the same food. You have some food that's being consumed in Kenya by people, by only a very small percentage of the people. Or is it the food that's being consumed in Kenyan street in Kibera? Street food in Kibera. All that's Kenyan food. So who determines what Kenyan food is? Nobody. So apparently, we have to define Kenyan food. And this is the way I thought about it. If Picasso used African concepts to draw his art, does that make Picasso's art African? No. It's still European art, but using African concepts or being inspired by African concepts. So in the same way, every cuisine that I prepared itself is Kenyan cuisine. But I can't say, it's the Kenyan cuisine in the sense that if you go to Kenya, you can find the kind of cuisine I'm finding everywhere. So I realized that for two reasons. One, as a way of decolonizing African food, but also as a way of surviving racist systems in the West. In the West, you still have racism. And America rewards thinkers and inventors, innovators. And it's also a way of creating, owning my own work and creating respect around my own work. So I realized that I had to label my work so that I own it. I patent it, just like you said. Other major corporations make GMOs so that they can patent that and they can use that politically. I'm simply doing what other people are doing. I'm not trying to invent the wheel that has worked for other people. Make it simple. So I labeled my own cuisine. But that's number one. But there's also that third reason maybe we can touch on that can probably create a clear picture as to why I came up with the cuisine that I came up with. And that is, it's a very easy way of explaining a philosophy just by the name. If you say, I'm a man, okay, words paint pictures to ourselves. He's a fat guy. No, then okay, he's a tall guy. Okay, you're telling you by saying that, then you create a picture of the kind of concept you're talking about. So by naming my cuisine, it tells you my philosophy about my cuisine. For example, Afro means African inspired. It also pays tribute to the first person I heard doing the kind of work that I'm doing, who is Fela Kuti. Fela Kuti was just a person who was raised in a family with the mentality that most of the best way to live was the Western way. The Western way was the best, right? But until he traveled to the US with his girlfriend called Sandra, who was from Oakland, California. And Oakland was a hotbed of the Black Panthers. So when Fela Kuti went to Oakland, he was introduced to the Black Panthers and their movement. And it totally changed his way of thinking. These were people who are talking about Black consciousness, about African liberation, power to Black people, the Black people having the right to live just like everybody else unapologetically and having the ability to define their own destiny and the such. That changed Fela Kuti's thinking. From there, when he went back, he changed the kind of music he was singing, and he moved back to Nigeria later, and he started Black consciousness. Music was that he didn't just sing to make money. He used the music to as a weapon to empower the people. So Afro Futuristic, that's the Afro part. Then the Futuristic is that my thinking is that with the kind of world that we have today, and with the kind of challenge that we had with climate change, that the people who are going to be alive will be the people who will have to eat a certain way. If you don't eat a certain way, you're going to be out of the game. You're going to be kicked out of the game. As we can see with lifestyle diseases, the competition for food markets where global companies are trying to sell food that's not healthy for other people. So you have to be really conscious consumer, and you have to be very conscious about the kind of climate we are living in terms of the kind of food market and how food now is being used as a political weapon. You can't just say, oh, this is just candy. I don't care about candy. You have to ask yourself, what's in the candy? To what end? What are the consequences of you consuming this candy? Not only to yourself, but to the environment, to your own health, and to the future of your children. So does this candy have chemicals that can be epigenetic, that change your genes and such? And that's how I came up with the cuisine.
The first time I heard the name of the cuisine, it sort of already painted a picture for me on what actually it means, because I could connect the Afro thing, the conscious thing and the futuristic thing all together. But it's so refreshing to hear, explain from your own perspective on how you saw it to create such a name that, creates a vivid picture. It's a very clever way of naming it, and it ties directly into the next question that I had is, you're very much involved about talking about food literacy, right? And, some of the topics that you've been involved heavily talking, as I said earlier, you've talked to different universities talking about the importance of food literacy. So first of all, can you help us explain what you actually mean with the term food literacy? And secondly, help us explain more on, this project you're having in Naivasha.
Allow me to clarify one more point I wanted to add on in the previous point, which ties to the question that you asked about the importance of labeling stuff. That has to do with me labeling my cuisine, naming my cuisine, but also naming my recipes. I've never prepared anybody else's recipe in any of my events. All my events that I've been invited to or I've participated in, I always name all the recipes, and I give them names that are relevant to my own life. Some of my best friends, people I respect, from books maybe I read in Kenya, a town I visited, anything that has memory to me or has value. So, right? Why do I do that? I do that specifically because I was a part of a group of people who are very, very opposed to the idea of Europeans labeling places that they discovered. And then more specifically about Columbus. There was a big debate since I've been here in the US where people were very opposed to celebrating Columbus Day. There's a day called Columbus Day, and that day celebrates the day that Columbus landed in this shores. And I was for a long time. But then I stopped opposing that. I realized how duplicitous or how dishonest I was by opposing the naming of a place or a lake by people who came to that place and brought a new ideology. If an African can take their child today and say, I want you to name my child Christopher, today in 2021, and say, I want my child to be named Christopher, the name of the same person who maybe invaded or discovered and caused genocide in that particular region. And it can be James or John, whatever, it doesn't matter. What that tells me is that for me to say that person did not discover that place, I'm being dishonest. Why? Because the new energy they brought, the new reality they brought to that area is still taking hold. And the power that person brought is still relevant to this day. People are still worshiping the same God, or the same people who invaded them, the people who caused them genocide. Then we need to recognize that, yeah, these people do have power. Do you have to agree with it? No, but you have to recognize it. Simply because it's raining doesn't mean, oh, you're supporting the rain, or because you're just simply recognizing what it is. Why am I saying that? It's because by recognizing that, then can you be honest enough to say, yes, this is what happening, but we are challenging it. How are we challenging it? By naming ourselves. I realized that I also could name my cuisine and serve that cuisine to anybody as a way of countering what I don't support. I don't support the idea that an African can grow potatoes, use oil from Kenya, and then call those whatever he prepared chips or French fries or a Spanish omelet. Neither the egg came from Spain Did the tomatoes came from Spain or anything came from? But yeah, you're saying, oh, I made a Spanish omelet. So does that? I wanted to mention that about the importance of mentioning or labeling my food. Now, let me talk about food literacy, which is very connected to what I just mentioned, and that's why I've decided fast segue a little bit and talk about the naming. What does food literacy mean? Food literacy can be best painted or explained by using the concept of illiteracy to start with. If I tell you a person is illiterate, you have a very, very clear understanding about the power and the limitations of that person. You cannot tell a person who is literate, read your name, write your address, write the name of your children. They're illiterate. That's most people that I know or I've ever met have a very clear understanding of what being illiterate mean. You are illiterate. The same concept applies to food, but we don't seem to see it that way. That is more vivid and clear to people.
Yeah.
That people can be illiterate about food. That people just consume food without understanding what impact it has on them, what impact it has on the environment, what impact it has on their pocketbook, what impact it has on their investments, what impact it has on their dreams, what impact it has on their political freedom, what impact it has on the economic well-being or vitality of their country or their region or the world. Nothing. So people just become mindless consumers. You don't know. People are just eating. If you ask, why are you eating? No, I'm just eating. I'm just eating. What do you know them? No, I don't care. It just tastes good. Because I'm eating it because they are selling it. That's what they have. That is a very clear indication to me or example of a people who are illiterate about food. So not understanding that food is political is part of being food illiterate. That we don't understand the power and the dangers and the risk of food. That consuming food a certain way comes out with a lot of risks, and eating in another different way brings a lot of promise. You cannot invest in a company that you don't know the fundamentals of. So you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what food literacy means. Food literacy means the simple, basic understanding of the ramifications of consuming food in a particular way in context of the time in which you're living.
Yeah.
Period.
I think it's fantastically put. That leaves me with a very, very serious question, because you've lived arguably in one of the best countries in the world, the United States. I mean, it's the richest country in the world, and you've been fortunate enough to also live in Kenya, which is considered as a third world country. And when you look at, the food choices of these two countries, it's very different. I mean, from the food literacy point of view, you could easily argue that citizens of the United States are very much food literate compared to any other country. Freedom of the press, people are given the choice to choose which kind of food they can be able to purchase, and people have an opportunity to read from different places, different things, to get more information on what kind of food they can be able to choose. But that doesn't seem the case. The United States is using a lot of their budget in healthcare, for example, and very much little in buying food, for example. And we all know that food is medicine. So maybe you can help us clarify what is happening here. Why is this disconnect really happening in one of the richest country and one of arguably the most literate citizens?
Good. Number one, first and foremost, just for clarity in my position, I have big issues with saying food is medicine, and for simple reasons. As an educated person, whenever I'm forums, I would not allow somebody who is well educated to be dishonest to their education by making a statement that we can prove very, very quickly is not true. For example, if you say this bottle of water is 1 kilo, then you have to agree then to the fact that medicine is food. Okay, are you willing to eat medicine every night to be food? No, you're not.
Yeah.
When is the last time you took your girlfriend out to a pharmacy for dinner? Instead of taking for a dinner, for an outing, you take to a pharmacy. So that's a very incorrect statement. And next time at another podcast, you can ask me to tell you my own analysis as to where that misunderstanding came from and has perpetuated all the thinking. I mean, from doctors, they say food is medicine. And we have come to the conclusion of proving that is a very incorrect statement. Okay, first and foremost. Second, let me talk about food literacy in the U.S. America has the best and the worst of any country is worse because when you talk about, you grew up in the village, for some, and you spent some time in the village. So you're obviously very familiar with the fact that when we went to the school in the village, we all wore the same uniform. Most of, at least I didn't know about your time, but in my time, we all went to school barefoot. So it really didn't matter whether my parents could buy me shoes or they couldn't buy me shoes. We all went to school barefoot. In other words, there was very little difference between the wealth gap between the have and the have-nots. So the village, when I went to the village, it was a very, very good environment for me to go to school. I'm saying that to say that in the US, you can be poor just relative to how wealthy other people are. You see, so you are at a very great disadvantage because those people who are wealthy have so much advantage over you and over your children. So that's first point. Second point is a very good place for people who have money. So you have some of the best education in the world for people who have money in the US. Because, you can you think about it. With a country with 350 million, if you are powerful in this country, that means you can pull strings for your son to go and work at Google, for example, to work at Apple, for example, to go and meet Jeff Bezos if you have power. Okay, you can be the president of the US, being the president of Kenya, for example. Simply because you're the prime minister, you're the president of Kenya, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have access to the president of some of these big corporations, for example. So having said that, now let me answer your question. One of the beautiful things about the US is that they have, I don't know whether people can see it on the camera. I have a label. I have a label on this avocado. And it has 5 digits. On the bottom of it. Start with a 9. And it's 5-digit number. That simple thing makes America a very, very different place to live from another country that does not have the Organic Food Act. Because what that label does, it tells you exactly how much chemicals are put in this avocado. And I have a squash. And the same thing squash, you can see with the squash. If I can hold it to the camera, you can see that you have somebody can take a picture of it, they can enlarge it, but you see it's a number that starts with a 9. It's a 5-digit number. In the US, the beautiful thing, and one thing I highly appreciate with the US, is America allows you to know when you're poisoning yourself. How beautiful is that? So you want to kill yourself? Okay, you're killing yourself at this rate. This is how much chemicals you are. That's something very simple, small, but yet Kenya hasn't been able to do that, and most African countries have been able to do that, and for political reasons. Because if you have Organic Food Act in Kenya, that means a lot of the big corporations here in the US will not be able to bring food in Kenya that's toxic. Why? Because they will label, and everybody will know that there's so much chemicals in the food that we are consuming. But when you say, no, we are not going to label, you make everybody, you make no distinction between somebody who is literate and illiterate about food. Because, okay, if you are illiterate about food, or if you're literate about food, but you don't have means of measuring or determining what kind of food you're consuming, then what good is your literacy helping you in? It doesn't help you. So that's why food literacy, that's why I came up with the concept of food literacy, that we have to be literate about food. We have to be literate about food. If we are not, then we have liberations or we have freedoms, but no way of exercising those freedoms. It's like being literate but not having books to read. Okay, easy as having school fees but no schools to attend. Okay, so it doesn't help you to have school fees if you can't attend any schools.
I always try to ask myself, how is it possible that, in the United States, we can have such a clear rules? Arguably, a lot of information that you might want is actually there, is given to you, but people still choose to take different paths, to eat different food that they know. As you said, if you read your labels well, you can know, maybe, this is not the best food that I'm eating, but still people tend to choose to eat that kind of food. It's a complex story that I think we can go on, but maybe not at this time. But I would like to, to help the viewers who are listening to this and people who are watching this, what can they do from a consumer perspective? I mean, what choices can they make to change their food choices, for example? I mean, they may have all this information, but what are some of the few steps and practical steps that you can share with them to change maybe their food decisions moving forward?
Number one. I would have to still say one thing and not let that topic by. And I won't spend a lot of time, but say, unfortunately, a lot of the people in the US don't know. And I say this, how is it that we have an educational system and the educational system does not teach us the most basic thing that we'll be dealing with for the rest of our lives? You know, if you go to an I always say in most places that I speak, I say, if you go to any class, elementary school, high school, college, the teacher cannot determine for sure what career you'll be holding. Any of those their students will eventually be engaged in. But all those teachers from elementary school, from preschool, should have no doubt that all those students will be eating for the rest of their life. And yet they'd spend all this energy to teach them all these other things except one thing, how to eat. We need literacy. We need to teach people more, right? And a lot of people are not choosing. A lot of people don't have choices. You know, politically, you can put you in a particular political position that eliminates a lot of the choices for you. For example, if you're living in Gaza, in Palestine, now, you know, you can just decide, hey, I want to get out and go to Russia or to the US today. You don't have that choice. Why? For political reasons. So that's why we go right back to being literate, food literacy, because it gives you a very clear understanding of your limitations. By so doing, it allows you to make strategic decisions about where you need to put your resources. Maybe we need to put our resources to make sure people are literate about it. That's number one. Then we need to put resources in making sure the government passes the Organic Food Act. Maybe we put our resources in making sure we have certified organic seeds in Kenya, which we don't have, and so on and so on. So what advice do I have for the listeners? Well, unfortunately, I don't have shortcuts. Food is the only thing I know you can buy used. You know, if you can afford new clothes, I can tell you, my friend, you can go to Mtumba, you can buy used clothes, or you can just get a shuka and you can. Food is the only thing that doesn't have a shortcut. It has proven to be the only thing that we have to play by the rule at every single stage of the game. You can't have a shortcut. Food, you have to have clean soil. You can have your uncontaminated soil. You have to have very, very clear myths and concepts about food. Maybe one on another time, I can talk to you about how myths inform our food decisions. I'll give you a quick example if you have 1 second, 5 seconds. I listened to somebody speaking about food yesterday, and they constantly refer to food from sewage. Sewage. So people have this myth in their head that the only contaminated food is food from the sewage. So think about it as a Kenyan. How many rivers do we have? How many rivers in Kenya are connected to the sewage system? There are very, very few rivers. Very, very few rivers. So even if you are to grow vegetables along all the rivers that have sewage in them, there are very, very few compared to the rest of the food that we have in the country. That is like in the Rift Valley. How many rivers do we have in the Rift Valley? We have very few rivers in the Rift Valley. In Nyandarua, how many rivers do we have in Nyandarua? Very few rivers do we have in Nyandarua. How many homes in Nyandarua and the Rift Valley are connected to the sewage system? There are very few. But yet, sewage food is not even 1%. If you are to get all the food that's being grown in Kenya in the sewage, doesn't constitute 0.5%, in my view. Not even 0.2%, 0.02%. But yet, in our image, we have this myth that we have come to believe that the only bad food is sewage, greens from the sewage. See, so that kind of thing. So we have to be very, very well educated about the myths, about the information, about the soil. We can have a shortcut about. So I started with the myths. We can have wrong myths around food. We can have wrong ideas. We can have wrong soil. You know, we can have wrong seeds. If we have contaminated soil, then game shot. We don't have good food. If we have seeds that are GMO, we can have good food. If we can have pesticides, we can have good food. We can have a way of processing the food that's bad food. Bad for the food. We can have oil, which is a big topic for another whole podcast. Yeah. I went to segue again a little bit. I went to the village where I grew up, and I saw some. I don't know whether you might have seen this. There are these recycled tin cans that people use to roof their houses. Have you ever seen them?
Yeah.
Did you have that in your village? Yeah. So a lot of them used to be from cottonseed oil. There was this kind, they use them for roofing, and they turn gray very quickly. They turn brown. So you can go, and people with not a lot of money, they have these, and young people would use them to construct houses for their chickens, their rabbits, and something like that. So we used to have one like that. We had a kitchen that had some of these recycled tin cans, tin pieces. Then, so later, I went to one of my neighbors like 2 years ago, and they still have that structure standing. And for out of happenstance, I looked at the writing on the wall, and it says, "Hey, double bleached cottonseed oil." So they even back as early back as 70s, we were using oil that is being bleached and then deodorized. You're putting deodorant in the vegetable oil that you're using to cook. Yeah. So again, if you cook the food really good, you grow the food really good, you use compost manure very good, you don't use all the chemicals, but yet you use what? Highly processed vegetable oil.
Yeah.
Very toxic. You cook it beyond the smoking point. When you used to travel on the street food in the streets of Kenya, you would see people selling street food that is being dipped in oil, fried, like fried cassava, fried potatoes. They are constantly using that oil. By constantly using that oil, that means you're cooking that oil beyond its smoke point. Once you boil all this oil beyond its smoke point, it becomes toxic. Again, you see, so there are so many stages that we need to be aware of if at all we intend to have what? Healthy food.
Yeah.
And that's what food literacy means. And that's why I can give you short advice. There's no shortcut. You just have to be literate. You have to be literate, and you have to empower yourself, and you have to treat food as political. And if you think voting is important, remember you vote 3 times a day if you have means. Anybody with means votes 3 times a day by eating. And the kind of food you eat determines the kind of political system we have, the kind of economic system that we have, the kind of people that we have, the kind of children we have in the future, and so on and so on.
It's very interesting. Your resume speaks for itself. I mean, the amount of work you've done, especially in the activism space. I mean, you yourself being a chef, cooking, speaking in different platforms, and starting different projects in the food space. Maybe you can help us really from the wisdom that you've garnered from all these places. Just give us some of your takeaway that you have collected from all your involvement in this space. Maybe there's someone who wants to go your direction can take away. 3
pieces of advice is I say, be honest. Be very honest with yourself. Be very, very honest with yourself. One of the biggest predicaments we have as Africans is this dishonesty. We are being very dishonest with ourselves. We try to hide, bury our head and think, oh, this problem will go away. Oh, we'll be blessed. Oh, we are praying. This will happen. The change is not happening, right? Be the change that you want to be, okay? So if you're honest, you realize, hey, we are doing bad. Then be honest enough to take action. Be very proactive. Know that very little will change until we change. We have to have collective responsibility. People who are interested in getting in this space are more fortunate than any other people in the past. You can imagine for me when I moved here in 1989, the Organic Food Act was passed in 1990. So it's been a long journey. There was hardly any book that I could read written about food, about Black food, about Africans, So if anybody is interested in, there's almost no excuse whatsoever. There was no internet in those days. So what that really means in a nutshell is that you cannot afford to stand still in a moving train. So everybody has to be engaged in creating the kind of food system that we want. How do you want to eat good food? How do you want to enjoy freedoms, but you're not willing to work for? How is that different from stealing? You want other people to work, and then you go and reap the benefits. You want other people to do all the work, and for you just come and enjoy. Okay, no wonder we have a broken system, because some people work, other people just simply enjoy.
I think that is pretty solid. I mean, nothing is easy. You have to be honest about yourself and some of the things that you want to do, and always be humble. I think that is some solid advice for anyone who wants to enter into your space. This is one of those sections that I get to enjoy a lot with my guests, and it's a very good segment that I think the viewers really get to know you a little bit better and get to know the fun side of your work. So this is where we get into our rapid fire questions. So I throw 10 questions to you, and you give me your answers. So hopefully we'll get to learn a thing or two from this particular segment. You ready?
I am ready.
Okay, good. The first question is, what was the first career that you dreamt of having when you were a kid?
Business.
If you had to have one meal going forward, which meal would that be?
Mushrooms, a dandelion, and root celery.
What is your favorite beverage, coffee or tea?
Tea is the default.
Fourth question, if you could make a meal for anyone, who would it be?
Fela Kuti, if he was alive, right now, Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
So the fifth question, what is your favorite ingredient to work with and why?
Black pepper is very, very good. Black pepper, I love black pepper. I put black pepper in literally even in my tea.
The sixth question, would you rather never cook or never taste again?
If I could live without eating, I'll always cook. I'll take cooking. I'll always cook in my life. But since I can live without eating, then I have to eat. But if I have to cook for others and have somebody providing me with food, I always cook. Cooking is something I like to do all my life.
The seventh question is a little bit tricky. Breakfast for dinner or dinner for breakfast?
Breakfast for dinner.
The eighth question is, what's your favorite meal and why?
Dinner is my favorite meal because breakfast, people tend to prepare in a rush.
Nice. Second last question, what quote resonates with you most?
Abandon hope, all ye that eat unconsciously.
So the last question, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Health is your number one item on your portfolio. You should have no portfolio if you don't have high health on it. Throw it away. Yes, you don't have a portfolio. If you're not okay, you're saving money for what? What retirement? You can't save enough money to be sick. You can't afford to get sick. So health should be the first item on your portfolio.
Nice. I love it. I love it. It's very, very straightforward, but a very, very important message as well that I think I could have also liked to live to my 18-year-old self. So thank you very much for joining me in this particular conversation. I loved every bit of it. The one thing for sure is I've learned a lot from food literacy to some of your work that I didn't know actually you've done before. So this was eye-opening for me. Different listeners will find this particular conversation very helpful to them also and very insightful. So I can't wait to some of the feedbacks that we'll get from this conversation. So my only thing to you is thank you very much for joining me in the conversation.
Have a good one. And anybody who wants more information, I have a blog. Maybe I should have mentioned that, chefkabui.com. Yeah, and you can leave me a message there. If there's any way I can help. I also have a mentorship program for people who are interested in getting this space, whether it's chefs, whether it's activists, whether it's writers or something like that. I'm happy to help. Thank you very much for hosting me. Yeah, keep up the good work.
Pleasure. Till next time, ladies and gentlemen, remember to be organic. Cheers.